supposedly live now?
Yeah, I think it might be live. So, gonna see if it's showing up here. Hey everybody, we were having technical problems on Facebook's end with doing a live stream from a page, and so we're trying to do it this way. So those of you who were trying to watch from our page, we apologize. I'm gonna just throw it up real quick on my personal page. So here we go. Good, yay!
We're here.
We are here. So just to give you a technical rundown, since we're 12 minutes late, the Facebook page just disappeared. We weren't able to schedule a live stream, and so we're doing it here on my personal Facebook account, and we'll make do with what we've got and hopefully get these things figured out next time. Maybe we'll just have to do it like this again when we do it next. As we're talking, I am also looking on my computer, and so any conversation questions that come up in the midst of things, hopefully I'll be able to be on top of that. But our plan is just to share a little bit up front about who we are and what we're talking about, and then shift to engaging conversation topics as they come up. So throw the speaking ball over to Dan.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Daniel Wolpert, and first of all, we are trying to sit far apart as possible, and maintain our social distance, while at the same time, I was thinking about like the folks over at Fox or CNN or whatever, they're still broadcasting, so I figure we could be broadcasting too. And
we're just as good as they are.
We are.
Maybe even
We
better.
are. I mean,
Certainly,
certainly, ontologically, we're as good as they are. It's Steve. Yeah, and so I direct the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing, or MICA for short, and I'm a lifelong student of the spiritual life, and also very involved in connecting contemplation to action, which actually is a very natural thing, and Mark and I have been doing a lot of work together for a number of years. This is sort of an introductory thing if there are folks on here who don't know me or you or either of us, so you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director of the Center for Prophetic Imagination, CPI for short. I wish it spelled a name like Micah. It's like a name. CPI just sounds like a pharmaceutical company. We've heard that before. The Center for Prophetic Imagination really is about, you could say contemplation and action, but I would look at it as connecting mysticism or deep spirituality with radical action in the world. So there's all kinds of ways you can slice and dice that, but to me that's primarily drawing from the prophetic tradition. And so Dan and I together are engaging in a series of, I don't know how long we'll do this. It depends on the response, depends on how long this is kind of a pandemic event kind of for us, right. Figuring out how to engage people during this time around the stuff that's coming up, because this pandemic isn't just about sickness and social distancing, it's also exposing different facets of our society that have been there all along, but now we're starting to see them maybe a little differently as we are stepping back to be isolated and noticing how our society is responding to a crisis. And so our first topic, we're talking a little bit about mental health.
Yeah, so we thought we met yesterday and drew up a wonderful list of topics. Oh, and I guess another thing we should say is how long we're going to do this for, talk for. Each one of these maybe about
half-hour-ish.
Yeah, about half an hour.
Yeah.
Obviously we got started late, so we'll probably go to about 10:40 or so. And then the recordings, I guess, will be available online afterwards. So as I said, we met yesterday, we drew up a list of topics, and really one of the first places we wanted to start was just with the issue of like, how are we doing, which in a more professional verbiage is going to be mental health. Where are people at at, what is going on as we've been hit by this really in a very rapid period of time. I mean, I just think about, 3 weeks ago, the world was literally a totally different place in a lot of ways. And so this has been a big shock to all of our system. And so we thought it'd be good to explore that and talk about where we're at. I know, personally, I've certainly gone through the gambit of feelings of, as I said, shock, confusion, uncertainty, fear, noticing all of those things both in myself and in the environment, the people around me. And it seems like any reflections that we have need to acknowledge all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's different ways of looking at this. I mean, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about from people who are watching is how they're experiencing this from their own perspective. And then also there's kind of the social level kind of analysis. So, and those are two kind of different ways of looking at it. One of the things that we talked a little bit about is specifically the sorts of things that get worse in times like this where people are cooped up, and how that isn't really being addressed. And I wonder if maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Right. So I mean and I think particularly as folks who are interested in the spiritual life, I mean, there's a lot of paradox in terms of all of this, because on the one hand, I certainly know that I and many of my colleagues have been teaching for years about taking more time apart, taking more time in quiet. And so in some ways, this is like this massive enforced spiritual practice event, or could be looked upon that way. But, then on the other hand, if you're doing that because you're losing your job or you're being told to stay away from people when you love being around people, then it doesn't really feel like a positive kind of event. And then I think the other thing that I've been thinking about in terms of this particular issue is that it seems like one of the things that is sort of a casualty of the coronavirus is our collective kind of hubris, the sense that we as people are very powerful and in charge of things, and now suddenly this tiny little cluster of nucleic acids and proteins is destroying our whole society, which is a very jarring, I think, and humbling kind of experience.
Yeah, it's been interesting, like, in some ways, because I kind of work from home and tend to feel a little bit more isolated than I'd like anyways. At first it didn't really hit me as hard as I think a lot of other people, because the first thing was people like having to not go to work.
Right.
And that was before restaurants got shut down, and so as we're seeing more and more things shut down that are more central to our lives, you're seeing people react more strongly, and we don't know if, at a certain point, if there's enough workers that work the grid, things like power, things like the internet, that could start affecting how most people live their lives. And we're not used to living, we were joking yesterday about how we could do a whole episode where we talked about what life was like before the internet. Like it's like two crotchety, like middle-aged men. But even those of us who grew up remembering, I spent months of my life living without electricity as a child, but it's not like I can revert back to that. So all these things, you lose the sense of control, the ability to live your life the way you normally live. And it's easy outside of it to kind of make fun of that, right? So like when Georgia gets snow and Minnesotans mock them, we think it's because they're somehow not tough enough, but the reality is they don't have lives built up around the ability to drive around in snow, and so it affects them, and it affects their mental state. And then that is like a domino that affects like how, if you're on edge, you treat your spouse or partner and your children, which can affect we're assuming substance abuse levels are going to skyrocket during this time, but what happens when the alcohol stores shut down? You can't get that delivered anymore, and so all of a sudden you have people who would otherwise be self-medicating who can't, which then causes other... it really does kind of become this spiral effect, and finding ways to respond to that before things happen seems important. Like, how do you get proactive about this, assuming things could get worse?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so before we talk about that, I mean, I'm seeing lots of comments coming up here. I'm wondering if there's anything that...
Yeah, I'll look at
yeah,
there's been a couple of people said, hey, you're not sitting 6 feet apart. We kind of talked about that. I think there's... Yeah.
We are sitting almost 6 feet apart. We didn't get a tape measure, but pretty close.
It's more closer to 3.5.
At least 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're...
Okay, so that's...
So don't you can you? I have my permission not to come to my house, and I promise not to breathe on you. I thought that time of isolation would be restful, but instead it has been a much harder, more busy experience than daily life.
Yeah, and actually I was on a group meeting with a number of pastors and spiritual leader folks the other day, and actually a few people said that they have been busier during these last couple days being at home than they have been before. And again, I think that you know what we're seeing in real time is this reality of what happens right when there's a shock to our system and when our regular routines are upended, right? And so there is this kind of running, almost panic thing that happens where we're trying to readjust and reorient, figure out what's going on. So there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of stress hormones, there's a lot of those kinds of things happening. And and so it's not restful. It's not restful. And I think this is where, you know, from the spiritual practice point of view, being very intentional about taking those times to stop and to slow down and to do some breathing exercise, some meditative exercises is going to be really, really helpful and valuable during this time.
Yeah, and Ellen pointed out that maybe it's because of how we all love routines. Yeah, my routines, like, so I work from home, so you'd think, oh, now my life would just be kind of just the same. But all of a sudden we're all on top of each other, not literally, but so my son is home from school, my wife is trying to work from home, and that's like she's having to shift from being a teacher in a classroom with mostly adult refugees to trying to figure out from scratch their distance learning program she's been tasked with. And so like now, we're all in each other's space, and so I can't get in any uninterrupted time. And then we're also having to do this stockpiling thing, and that starts affecting my mental health. Like just, I deal with anxiety and depression, so like changes in my routine, not knowing if I have space to go work, and I can't leave the house. That's the other thing. A lot of people like rest and relaxation, but part of the rest and relaxation is like, I'm going to go to this coffee shop and work for a bit, or I'm going to hang out with my friends and unwind tonight at the bar. None of that's there. And so the routine, the things that I would normally do just to kind of relax, different kinds of stressors, is all gone.
Yeah, and I think that the claustrophobia is a big issue. I mean, I don't have small kids in the house anymore, but I remember, when we had snow days or kids were sick and they were home, and especially when we had our farm and our kids were really little, and let's say the daycare provider couldn't come sometime. I mean, we all know that's not it's not easy, and right, that sense of I don't have the space that I had, I can't kind of think, there's all this in my mind, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that all of that is going on, and we're experiencing that, and it's very real, and it's very challenging, and that's just above and beyond whatever specific worry we have about getting sick. That just the setup that we are all being forced to deal with is one that is legitimately very, very challenging.
Catherine wrote, I felt too stressed to meditate the past couple of days, but whenever my partner does, I feel calm pervade the house. I think that's important. Part of it is like, if everyone else in my house was like in a rhythm and calm, it'd be much easier for me. But we're all kind of trying to figure it out. Like, just to be real, like the first, so the Minneapolis Public Schools stopped school on Tuesday, but my son wasn't feeling great. I mean, we would have normally sent him to school anyways. There was nothing feverish, and somehow miraculously his symptoms kind of went away after staying home on Monday. But so he was home, and I was just overwhelmed. And so Monday, my depression was bad. Like I couldn't do much of anything. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is how I'm going to be for this whole time of isolation. But I needed like one good day to be horribly depressed. Just to kind of, it was almost like my brain was resetting, saying, okay, now I'm going to slowly start building new rhythms. And it's been hard to give myself permission just to do that. Mm-hmm. Because now all of a sudden we went from being maybe really productive in a capitalist society to now feeling, I don't think any of us feel super productive right now. And that is psychologically hard because we're conditioned to see our worth and ourselves and our identities as kind of being productive members of society. And now none of us are really productive members of society the way we were before. And some of us are busier. Like if you're in certain industries, you might be busier, but you're not. It's a crisis response more than like career advancement, like any of those sorts of things where you feel like the positive feels of productivity are kind of stripped away. Mm-hmm. And that can cause a lot of stress because like our sense of meaning is shifted.
Yeah, and I want to go back to what Catherine was saying there about being too stressed to meditate. Two things. One is, right, if you're in a household with other people, so doing spiritual practices together makes it easier. And so that is something I would very much encourage. The other thing about meditation, right, and this is one of the greatest fallacies about meditative practice, is that it's about somehow being peaceful, right, or being spiritual, emptying my mind of thoughts, all of that, which is really not what meditation practice is about. It's not what the experience of it is. So it really is more about spending some time just sitting with who we are at the moment, which, if we're very distressed, can actually be, pretty painful and difficult, which is one of the reasons why doing it with others is helpful. But so even if you spend some time being with yourself, being aware of how stressed out you feel, over time that becomes a helpful and valuable thing. And so appreciating that it's hard, and also knowing that the effects of that is worthwhile over time. And and then the productivity thing, and of course if you've been laid off, which is what millions of people are now going through, right, then obviously you're not being productive in that capitalist sense. And mm-hmm. So right, that's going to add not only a whole layer of practical stress and difficulty, but then also just we come up against that sense of, right, am I worth anything if I'm not producing? So that becomes another very challenging part of the reflection time.
Yeah, there's a couple of responses. Like I'm noticing that, so Ellen's talking about parenting and how it's like different when you're parenting a toddler when they're homesick, but her toddler is toddlering hard. Right. We are going to talk about kids, and hopefully one of these conversations coming up. Mm-hmm. Colin mentioned having to deal with suddenly being confronted with his older parents' mortality. We're going to talk about, we actually have on our upcoming topic list coming up pretty quickly, we're going to talk about death. Mm-hmm. The issue of being confronted with a mortality is something our society is designed to avoid, and so this is bringing up all kinds of issues. So we'll talk more about that. Maybe we can talk a little bit about it now. Mm-hmm. Amy, my spouse, wrote, saying, I caught my mom off guard when I started bawling when she told me she had gone to a large baby shower on Saturday and church on Sunday. I thought she was already staying home and avoiding gatherings. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just the different responses to this. Like some people are taking it differently. And, the Fox News crowd, we know statistically is taking it less seriously, and that crowd does skew older. So that's kind of a scary thought.
Well, maybe that's something we could begin talking about now, because I do think that is an enormous part of what we're up against here, right? Is that So we do live in a society that has basically tried as much as possible to marginalize death. So again, you know, for most of human history, people were around death all the time. People died at home, people died in the streets, people died in battles that were happening outside the town square.
We didn't have funeral homes.
Yeah, we
did funerals in spaces where people gather now. They even older houses would have those double wide doors outside because that's how you get a coffin in and out to have things like wakes, which wakes were done in homes.
Yeah. And so I think that human beings had a much more immediate and realistic sense of the fact that we are mortal. So now we've pushed all of that aside to the margins, and even though, of course, you know, we all know people who are dying, who have died, it's very much out of the public consciousness. And now this has thrust it right back into the public consciousness, and you know, we're being warned and told about how many millions of people are going to die over the next period of time. And of course, millions of people are dying every year anyway, but again, we're not thinking about it every day. Now we're thinking about it every day. And so that is a very, very different experience for us, and and very, very jarring. You know, what is interesting is, and I was just on the phone this morning with a pastor talking about this, you know, there are a lot of people who are over 80 who, as they've looked at this and contemplated this, have said, well, you know, I am ready to die. Like, if I die from this, that's okay. But that's not a view that our society tries to promote. And so, yeah, I do think that this is a real opportunity, challenging, but an opportunity for us to reflect upon, what is our relationship and feeling about death, and how are we understanding that death is an immediate part of life.
Yeah, I was thinking about this issue of death and how we avoid it, and how the fear of death, like almost every kind of shitty thing about our society is somehow built upon the fear of death. So like the reason that we all tolerate a massive military and industrial complex is because somehow we think securing ourselves at the expense of people overseas is worth it somehow. And that's again driven by the fear of death. You know, the only thing our society becomes increasingly pluralistic, and we don't have a shared common belief system. The only thing we can all agree on is that living healthier longer is a good thing. And so basically that's become our social religion, is living longer and being healthier. And so if you start stripping that away and realize like, oh, we can't guarantee those anymore, then everything kind of starts frizzling at the edges. And you know, this is usually the time when people traditionally in crises become traditionally religious. All of a sudden they start going back to these older ways.
So what have we got? We got some more comments here.
Yes, some conversation about parents, again about parents having, Catherine writes, my parents both have high risk factors, and my dad switches between awareness of that and talking as though a separate group of grandmas are the only ones at risk. They have 8 grandchildren. He drove from LA to Washington this week, but looks like he's planning to self-isolate for now. Ellen writes, I'm concerned with the connections we are making online being commoditized. That's a big one. Both a net neutrality issue and a mutuality issue with friendship, and having friends who are more popular in demand offering to meet with people online, and those meetings being very one way. I mean, this is kind of an example of that in a lot of ways. We're seeing kind of the weaknesses of some of these technologies. Like, one of the things we're going to talk about is how churches, their first response was to find a way to live stream sermons and worship, which isn't a bad thing, but it shows like how this technology is generally still more geared towards one-way communication, and how do we start using the technology in a way for mutual aid and care that still isn't dominated by people who have a stronger social media presence. That's a big topic. James writes, I really worry about losing so many of our elders in the peace activist community. Yeah, it's legit. Joyce writes, I cried in front of my class when I told them we had to move our course online, essentially ending it, as it's a studio-based practice class. Aside from missing the interaction with them and the artworks they were going to make, I hope they will not lose sight of their potential either. Small compared to other things, but also a thing to deal with. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, I do think that we, and I think that we're coming to more and more of an awareness of this, and it will begin to build over time. We have to recognize that everything we do has an effect, right? So everything we do becomes a cause for another effect. And right now, what we're focusing on is, okay, we don't want people to get this disease. So we're doing all kinds of things to hopefully help that. Those things that we're doing are going to have a lot of other effects. And one of them, that's a very big and significant one, is that social distancing also can become social isolation, also which can become social loneliness, also which can become very debilitating. And I think it's important to be very real about that is an effect that's going to continue to snowball. And we are going to, I suggest, we're going to need to pay attention to that and really think about, okay, is this something that we want to be doing to this extent? What are the benefits? But also, what are the downsides? And again, from the mental health point of view, all of this starts from paying attention to ourselves. How am I doing? How am I feeling? What's going on in the environment around me? How am I interacting with the people that I am with and next to and cooped up with? And am I paying attention to that and then engaging with practices and activities that really help me to come into the present moment and try to not fly off into anxiety, despair, those kinds of things.
Just to highlight this, Ellen shared a link in the conversation thread. Ellen is offering a live music concert on Zoom. There's a link there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a great sort of thing. It's not the same. I've actually been in a living room where Ellen has been doing a concert, and I'm sure the Zoom won't be the same experience, but these are the sorts of things I think actually help. This is the sort of thing, a week ago, someone doing a concert over Zoom, or there's been larger bands doing concerts that they've been streaming. That's the sort of thing I would never have been interested in. But now it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's also hard for some of us to, I've seen a number of posts about how I have to reach out to our extrovert friends who are suffering in this time, and sometimes it's shared in a tongue-in-cheek way, sometimes seriously. But it's the sort of thing that most of us are not used to reaching out to someone saying, hey, can we have a Skype call because I'm feeling lonely. That's not,
Right.
It's going to be really hard for us to lean into those sorts of things, and we have to start, and it starts with normalizing it, this is a thing that people do now.
Yeah.
Is they Skype a lot. Maybe they did before. A lot of us already did. But
yeah, and I think that that's really important. And again, this is this business of we're in this transition period of somehow adjusting to a new normal. And I think that's a really important thing to do. I mean, I've had more online, phone, email exchange conversations with friends of mine that I would not normally talk to in that way over the last 3 days than I have in long periods of time. And people are really appreciating it, right? I mean, I've got some friends whose daughter is in Hong Kong, and just reaching out to them and going, hey, I'm thinking about you, I'm thinking about your daughter, this is really hard, and that was met with a great deal of appreciation. And I think that all of those things from the mental health point of view are going to be really important and will help us a lot. And yeah, we need to recognize what we need, and as you say, ask for it.
yeah, it's been a little bit difficult for me. I'm better on Zoom, but I'm like one of those people who just doesn't talk on a phone, some sort of weird phobia. It's, as far as I can tell, it's my only flaw. No. I mean, I've gotten
That
people.
and the fact that you're not sitting 6 feet away from
Yeah,
me.
it's also
It's your second
it's
flaw.
3.5 feet or so.
Maybe 4.
I can get the tape measure. I've actually had people get really upset at me because the only person I really ever answer the phone for is Amy, and then friends of mine who, if they've ever experienced me actually calling them, they'll be weirded out. Like, is everything okay? Will be the response. But so I'll just say I'm not a phone person, and so Skype I'm better at. But it's hard. Like, I'm just naming this. It's normal to be anxious about some of these disconnected ways of engagement. It's normal and okay to be feeling anxious about lack of connection. And I think part of it is also like there is a low level guilt that I think people have that they don't like the social distancing. They maybe want to fudge it a little bit and they feel bad about, like, I think we have to be normal about how this stuff is hitting us. And so otherwise we're not going to be able to figure out ways to make things a little bit better.
Yeah, and I guess so. We're coming up about to the half-hour point, so maybe we'll start wrapping it up. And what you just said, Mark, really reminds me about something that is, I think, at the cornerstone of both prophetic life and action, which is compassion. As we started the social distancing thing, what it reminded me of was my experience of trying to childproof my house when we first had our first kid. And we were living in Vermont, and we were in this 19th century farmhouse, which, so it's very funky and had been remodeled all kinds of different funky ways over the years. And we're running a working farm, so there's stuff and equipment and everything everywhere. And I start wandering around the house, and of course, I'm reading these little baby books or whatever about, childproofing your house. And I very quickly realized that this feels impossible to me, that there's some basic things that I can do, but that actually there's tons of stuff everywhere that my kid could get into and potentially get hurt. And so at a certain point, I, as a new parent, had to really relax about that and go, okay, I'm doing the best I can. Something could happen, but I need to have some compassion for myself as I'm acting in this way. And I feel the same way about what we're going through now, is that unless every human on Earth got into a hermetically sealed spacesuit, there is no way that we cannot ultimately have some contact with each other at some point along the line of existence. And we need to have compassion for ourselves and say, well, we're going to do the best we can. We're going to work hard to get through this. It's going to be difficult at some points, but that's the best we can do.
There's a comment here from Colin, and this is anticipating a little bit where we're going to go with future episodes, for lack of a better term. These are all probably things you're going to cover, but I've been keeping a running list of things that are being shown to be fake right now.
Oh my God, Colin anticipated the exact title of our next set of things.
Among them are wages, debt, rent, utility bills, cash bail, jail. Lots of shit rules we've lived under while forgetting we make the rules. One, it's interesting. I have a friend who's a defense attorney, and he posted about this, how, like, local jails are being cleared out. And so they're like, well, we're going to release people that aren't really a danger to society from jail right now because out of a need to have more social distancing. And he's like, why don't you just admit that there's no fucking reason for them to be in jail at all then? Like, we're seeing a lot of these little social controls are being exposed to being unnecessary, or we're now seeing how they benefit. Like, the fact that Jeff Bezos is getting richer right now off of our suffering. And, there's only so much you can do. Like, he might be able to donate a lot or say, hey, we're hiring more people. But we're all people who didn't understand before. Now we're beginning to understand, wait, if these people are making money off us now in a time of suffering, wasn't that kind of what they were doing before? Like,
yeah. And so the next kind of set of topics are all going to fall under really exactly what Colin hit at, which is that there is something about an event like this that is an unveiling. And, you know, in the Christian and some other traditions, this is really what an apocalypse is, right? It is an unveiling that reveals certain things. And so that's what we're going to start taking on next. And we've got a list of several different things that are being unveiled. And that's what we'll get into.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff that Colin brought up, facets of capitalism, a lot of juicy fun bits.
Yeah, so thank you all for watching. This has been great. It's been really fun watching all the comments come up and occasionally the little emojis float through, and so we really appreciate your attention. And we're going to do this again tomorrow at the same time, and then keep going next week as long as there's interest.
Yeah, and we'll try to figure out the technology issue. I still think it'd be better to host this through the CPI and Micah pages, but if not, 10 a.m. one way or the other, it'll be going live somewhere tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.